Hello, everyone, and welcome back to The Accidental Mentor. I'm Charlene Garrett, your host, your guide, and yes, sometimes even your accidental mentor. We're continuing our series, Mentor Minutes, where we delve into short, insightful episodes packed with stories and lessons from my own life and from others who shaped my path. Please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe if you like what you're listening to. And also, if you have any questions, hop over to my website at charlenegarrett.com and you can ask them on any post. There's a post for every episode, so feel free to ask a question or leave your comments or tell us your stories. We'd really like to engage with you. In our last episode, we explored the significance of a trustworthy yes as it relates to personal boundaries and the inherent cost of our commitments. Today, we will delve deeper into understanding two topics: how our perceptions of boundaries are formed, and this complex idea of boundaries being weaponized, or if not weaponized, maybe just perceived as hurtful. Like maybe somebody else's boundaries hurt you. A listener recently posted an insightful question and said, "What does this look like in real life?" Like they liked all my ideas, but wanted some stories. So I'm hoping that today we'll get into a little bit more specifics and you'll be able to reflect, even in your own life, what does this really mean for you? So to begin, let's think about the origins of our perception of boundaries. How do we get our boundaries? We don't usually talk about boundaries or think about how we learn these things. They just happen, right? They stem from our formative years, right? We absorb these dynamics from our parents' interactions. We observe how they navigate relationships, how they do it with us, set limits, maybe how they perceive sacrifice, if they do sacrifice things for us or for others, if they're servant-minded. You couple this with familial influence, our cultural context. All these things play a significant role in how we perceive and understand boundaries. Basically, how we just start to act with or without them. So you could put this theoretically as well. You can go search this if you're interested, and I'll put it in the show notes. There's a theory called social identity theory. And this theory tells us that we are shaped, and our identity is shaped by the elements that we were given. So you're given things first, things that you don't choose. Things like the family you were born in, the country and culture, primary culture, and then other cultures that you were born in or lived in, decisions that your parents made for your family, your language, your physical characteristics, places that you moved or didn't move when you were a kid, whether you had a divorce in your family, were you raised in a two-parent household or not. These aspects, coupled with our evolving personal choices, so we get to then start deciding some things. Where are we going to move? What are we going to do? Who are we going to hang out with? Who are the type of friends that we're going to have? Do we like sports or art? Are we going to like a certain football team? I just moved to a part of the country that is really into football, and I'm recognizing quickly that a lot of people were born and raised inside of this idea of this football team. So those kinds of choices, sometimes we're born into them, and sometimes we get the choice, form the bedrock of our identity. Once we acknowledge that our identity shapes our boundaries, we can better understand how we might operate, either with too few or too many, or maybe highly selective boundaries, sometimes without even realizing it. Self-awareness becomes crucial in this context. By reflecting on our family background, our cultural influences, and our personal choices, we gain a deeper understanding of our boundaries and their origins. So let's take a minute and think about it. If you're driving right now, listening to this podcast, or you're working in the yard or washing your dishes, just take a second and think about, what were some things that were given to you? What type of family were you born into? Where were you born? What part of the world or the country? What were some of the key things that you didn't choose? Are you the baby of the family or the oldest? Is there a big gap? Are you maybe even an only child? How did that shape how you related to people? Have you always wanted to do something big in the world, or are you just really just trying to survive and have fun? These things are things that we can take a minute and just slow down And if you think about boundaries, how does that impact how you say yes or no? Do you find that you say yes a lot? Do you say yes sometimes when you want to say no? Are you reliable? I was talking to a friend the other day about reliability, and she was saying, my child isn't reliable yet. They change their mind a lot. And it's because they're a child, right? They're still forming that identity. Where are you in that? When I was young, we lived in the same place until I was about 11, and then we moved. It was a really formative move, a very important move for me. And we moved away from a place that I considered my home to a place that I never called home. And I never really loved that place. And as soon as I had the choice to leave, I totally did. I would visit, but I never called Florida home. I then moved several times, but usually have stayed 5 to 10 years in a place, which is, interestingly enough, the amount of time that I lived in each of those places as a child. Now, I didn't try to do that, but those were some things that I did. And I wanted long-term relationships, not short relationships. So I would say yes to things and hold on to these relationships and these networked relationships for a long time. So I had kind of a fluidity in some ways in the sense of boundaries. Similarly, if you grew up in a particularly religious household, you may have a set of values. Well, you do have a set of values. Whatever religion, by the way, that is, there are morals and tenets to that religion that profoundly shape your worldview, regardless of whether you maintain those in adulthood. You start out with those. And for me, I wasn't raised in that necessarily by my family, but I entered into it at a very formative age. And I was about 11, 12 years old, and I really value sacrifice, which is interesting because in Christian culture, it's a huge aspect, right? And so that begins this polarity. There's this polarity between sacrifice and obedience. And sometimes obedience to the Lord does not look like personal sacrifice. And that is where people can judge others, right? And where this dynamic gets really complex when your duty to sacrifice conflicts with the need for rest or your personal boundaries. My personal journey with boundaries was equally complex. As the youngest child in my family, I was a people pleaser, constantly saying yes to everyone and everything. This pattern continued into my college years, and not only did I say yes, but I expected other people to say yes to me. And that is another key aspect here. Whatever we do, the perspective that we have, we are expecting everybody else to be the same way. And when they are not, we are shocked. In college, I made a friend who is like the relationship depicted in Anne of Green Gables, like a bosom buddy, a friend. And we did everything together. In college, we were dining together often, which you couldn't consider it dining in college. We grabbed food. We hiked together. We had fun together. We went through some traumatic experiences together and survived. And then one day, my friend came to me and she said, Charlene, I need some space. I need to put some boundaries between you and I. I don't know that she used the word boundaries, to be honest, but she basically was communicating, this is a little too much for me. What I heard was, Charlene, you're too much for me. That's not what she was saying, but that's what I heard, right, through my filter. And by us stepping back and separating and growing independently, while it was a very painful time for me, it was so good because we began to develop healthy individuality that meant that we could actually have a more balanced friendship. And thankfully, our friendship has endured over 30 years and strengthened by a mutual respect for each other's boundaries. We understand where we end and the other person begins. And I think that's a key to personal boundaries. Now, do we sacrifice for each other? We absolutely do. This friend recently flew to my home in Nashville, helped me finish packing, drove the U-Haul truck full of my stuff to my new home, helped me unload it, and this was in the span of a couple of days, and then flew home. That was a huge sacrifice for her. She left children at home to need to be taken care of. She was coming from one place and going back to another place, and then she had to start work up again because she's a teacher, so it was in the summer. It was a huge sacrifice. And yet, she did that for me. And I would do similar things for her. I'm not a great packer, and I'm not as organized as her. So my similar things are going to look different. But we have different strengths, right? Okay, I want to shift from where we get our boundaries and our perception of boundaries to this concept that came up when I did the research about feeling like boundaries were good, except when. And that was kind of the connector, except when, ... And a few people said, except when they feel like they've been weaponized by other people, except when they are used by people to protect their preferences or their selfish preferences, except when they are used to exclude or hurt or push out people and maybe even dominate them, right? This idea of a weapon being used against. The other thing that came up in the research was boundaries are great, except when I don't know about them and I cross your boundary and it blows up. So a weapon that kind of feels like I stepped on a hidden grenade, right? I didn't know that was there. What do we mean by all of that? And I talked about it with some of these people that gave the information, and I just said, can you say more? I researched it a little bit. I've prayed about it. I've been thinking about it in my own life. And I think that it is, again, complex, where sometimes boundaries are sudden, right? We are evolving. We are learning about ourselves. I think that we may enter into relationships with low boundaries, kind of idealistically. And as we're going along, we may feel like we have a need to put up a boundary that we didn't know we needed before. I've seen that happen. Or maybe we learn about boundaries. We learn more about ourselves and we realize, oh my goodness, I am saying yes all the time and you think everything's fine, but I don't actually think everything's fine. I'm overwhelmed by you, as my friend said to me. I thought things were great when she came to me. Until they weren't, right? Until I was like, whoa, okay, this is new information. And it felt to me like she was lying to me. But the truth was she had just come to a realization, a new understanding of herself. So that's possible. I also think that there are times when people have just very limited capacity and they don't know their capacity and they put up these boundaries and they will say and use the word boundaries. I think the idea wasn't that they had the boundaries. When I was talking to people about it being weaponized, they said it's fine that they had boundaries. It was that they sometimes came up like a wall right up in my face. And the boundaries were just for a certain group of people. And I would say, while I really considered this, I think the key is that it's their choice. Whether their boundaries are excluding me or another group of people, or whether I want to judge that, I'm just very curious if I'm not just making a judgment. And why does it matter? It matters because it hurts, right? It hurt me. I wasn't expecting it. You all of a sudden don't want me in your life, maybe, or you don't want these people in your life, and I think that you should because you're a leader or you're in a position or you're teaching on these things, or, I think that you should. Even as I say that, I think that you should. I'm reminded of the phrase, and I don't know who first said it, but don't should on yourself, right? Don't put the heavy on you that you should do something. That is a great marker of I'm violating a boundary right there. Like I'm about to do something that I don't want to do based on what? On some sort of aspect that I think I should do it. And I want to say, I don't think that when I should on you or on myself, that I'm actually making a sacrifice. A sacrifice is acknowledging, hey, I don't want to do this thing, And I'm going to do it not because I should do it, but I'm going to do it because I'm going to make a choice to do something based on a value that is greater than my desire right now, right? Greater than the value of me being at rest and not having to exert effort. I have a value maybe for family, or I have a value for giving of myself, or I have a value to finish something that I started. So I'm going to do this thing because of that motivation and value, not because of an external expectation that I should. There's a nuance there, obviously. And I think that the way that I know the difference is how I feel about it afterwards. If I find myself, after I've sacrificed and given of myself for somebody, if I find myself complaining internally, really regretting it, complaining out loud maybe to those close to me, then I did something outside of my own choices, and I'm about to shift responsibility. I'm actually not taking responsibility for that choice. I'm shifting it to a should, to an idea, to a person, to a thing that quote unquote made me do XYZ. We really do make our choices. There are very few things that we are quote unquote in this world made to do. There are some, and there are definitely times when our agency is taken from us, and I'm not talking about that. But I think that we are really looking at this in the terms of personal choice. And sometimes when other people's boundaries are sudden, or maybe they are harder than I think they should be, or maybe they are walls. I perceive them as walls, they perceive them as a boundary, and it hurts me. I can perceive or think or feel like they've been weaponized against me. This can feel like a misuse of the tool of boundaries. And whether it is or whether it isn't, I don't think is the place for me to judge. I really do think that we have to be very careful about how we judge other people's use of boundaries, and really take this idea interpersonally to myself. How am I going to do this? I think that to navigate all of these complexities, it's essential to approach boundaries and people with empathy and communication. The empathy that I'm talking about here is listening to somebody and believing them. Recognizing that everyone has a right to their boundaries, but also understanding that how these boundaries are communicated and enforced can significantly impact relationships. So we strive for transparency and mutual respect, trying to ensure that boundaries serve to enhance rather than diminish our interactions with others. Gosh, that was a lot, right? Thank you for tuning in today. I appreciate your willingness to explore these challenging topics with me. If you've experienced pain at the hand of somebody else's boundaries or have insights to share, I'd love to hear from you. Head over to charlenegarrett.com/blog, leave a comment. If you disagree with me, it's okay. Tell me about it. I would love your thoughts on this. I am not the expert on boundaries. I am just wanting to give what I have, and I would love for you to do the same. So don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and we'll continue to lean into these topics together. Until next time, stay mindful and respectful of your boundaries and those of others. This has been Charlene Garrett with the Accidental Mentor Minutes. I'll see you soon.